This is 184.
You're listening to episode 184 of The Graveyard Shift.
Yes,
Thanks for
it
clarifying,
is.
Al. It wouldn't be the same if you didn't steal my thunder.
Hey, catcha!
What was that?
That was someone stealing thunder. Catcha!
Okay,
So I think,
wow.
I
Well,
think
last
the
time
day,
we had
Meow. Oh, that's true.
I think the day that I release this is actually going to be after all of my assignment deadlines for college, which means that I'm going to be in a very different headspace to the one I currently exist in.
so it's either extension day or
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, deadline day is fast approaching. And as much as I love Harawass's ecclesial ethics, this has been a challenge. So
They're
I'm
actually
sharing that.
they're studying Harwass's stuff at
Yeah.
CSI?
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Yeah, so I'm actually reading a guy called David Ferguson, and who
I'm
comes
surprised
from a
by
more,
that.
he's dude, these lectures are amazing. Like, I love this content. So my current essay is on
I don't think we asked.
don't really care. Did it. Done. So yesterday.
We've all moved on, Scott.
Yeah.
That's fair. Even me, after this podcast is released, will have moved on from this topic, but I am enjoying it. What
is your essay? What is your essay, Scott? What is the essay?
No. It's actually okay. It's actually okay.
No, come on.
Yeah. It's the Hauerwass's understanding of the distinctiveness of the church is phenomenal, but one of the main critiques against it is that it emphasizes the church more than it emphasizes the idea, like it emphasizes us emulating Jesus more so than it actually emphasizes Jesus himself. And so it's a really interesting critique of Hauerwas. So I've been so I spent about 7 hours on that yesterday. It's really, really fascinating stuff. So I very much enjoy it, but I'm aware that it won't be every listener's cup of tea.
Well, I mean, yeah. Do you remember when I was inviting him to Rubicon?
I do remember that, yeah.
And I got a phone call from him. And
Did you really?
Do you? We were doing we were writing the newer project.
I do remember that. Yeah.
My phone rang. I'm like, sorry guys, I need to take this. It was like an unknown number. And then the other side of the thing is like, hi, this is Stanley Hauerwas, whatever. And I'm like, 1 second. Does anybody know?
Oh no!
I mean, it was crazy.
And that was me just sitting there with my jaw hitting the floor. Firstly, for the fact that Hauerwas was calling you, and secondly that you didn't know who he was. I was like, how am I not getting this call? This is offensive to me.
Look, these guys need my advice every once in a while, and so my number's out there.
Influencer.
The lights. Yeah.
No, I mean, in the end, actually, he couldn't make it, but we've had other contact about him coming over because his wife works in Ireland at times. So
cool.
Very, very interesting. He was a nice guy. I obviously since then have read his stuff and really enjoy it. He's great. He's amazing. He's amazing.
He's phenomenal. Yeah.
That's great. You're doing that as part of your school, though. That's cool.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I have to write a 2,500 word essay planning a conference celebrating the 1600th anniversary of St. Patrick's arrival in Ireland. So the idea is it's a mental exercise where 8 years from now, I have to write up this conference plan and explain why I would do it in the Church of Ireland on behalf of the Archbishop. It's a really interesting way to do an assignment. So it's great. Yeah, it's good. It's very good stuff. Yeah,
very cool.
Yeah, it'll be
how are you guys doing?
Biggest Zoom call ever, as we're all still in lockdown.
Oh no! In 8 years' time, Al.
I know.
Oh, no.
Haven't you seen 28 Days Later?
No, I actually haven't seen it. No.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah, good. No, I haven't seen it.
Oh, okay.
No, I just continue to do research when I'm not doing all this stuff. I'll continue to dig into research. And it's really interesting. Actually, the only 2 genres dropped off in listenership in the month of March for podcasts worldwide, and that was TV. Interestingly, because I think a lot of people are online, and also religion and spirituality. So globally, there was a dip. Everything else was on the rise, but there's a dip in that area. So it's quite interesting to kind of watch the metrics on what's happening as far as how people are spiritually forming in a digital era, blah, blah, blah. Thus, that's my PhD kind of research is in. But even though everybody seems to be online, there's also been a dip in those people who are pursuing podcast oriented stuff. Now, maybe they're getting it from church services. That's quite possible. Maybe maybe their own communities are doing more now, so they don't have to go to external podcasts as much. Maybe they're getting more leadership from there. But it is interesting to kind of watch how people are ebbing and flowing in the digital stream.
There was a report in the Independent over the weekend. Someone out of the church sent it on to me, in that the search and the people buying books on spirituality and the Bible in particular has been shooting through the roof from particular bookstores. There was some guy over in Galway, and he was saying that the demand for getting the Bible plus other spiritual books has been, off the shelves. But it's been crazy. So it will be really interesting to see what becomes as people. And now in the report, as it did, even I know one of the things we read a couple of weeks ago, obviously after 9/11 there was a real surge, for a panic buy as such, for okay, I need to figure stuff out. So it'll be interesting to see, like, in another month's time as such, where we're at and where people are at in that sort of mind.
It'll dip. Yeah. It's just natural.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But to see whatever happens now and whatever people put in place now, where that will actually kind of go.
It's like the sales of my books dipped from -20 to -10 at its release.
That's cool. Why I'll never.
Greg was literally having to buy books back from people to save his relationship with them.
Actually, do you remember? I at one of my book launches, which were always very underwhelming. You know what I'm talking about, Scott.
I do.
Yeah, and all this fanfare for nothing. Oh my gosh! At least the film ones have been a little bit better attended. But my son was giving away free hugs to people he knew, with every book sale, in order to try to get the sales up.
I think I did a book launch where literally no one showed up. I think, if I remember correctly, it was a pretty tough day. I think I remember. That's.
I certainly did a film launch where no one turned up.
Oh, you did. That's true.
Yeah,
that's
we
true.
had the janitor. About that. Yeah. The janitor.
No. He was an audiovisual specialist apparently. No. But regardless, there's just one guy, and he came in 2 minutes to the end.
just to be there to watch you see your own name on the screen.
A whole lot of popcorn.
Well, to be fair, all I had to do was fly to Chicago and set it up, and so it was economical.
Yeah,
it definitely helped the environment.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Greta is my friend. I wish she was, actually.
So, Greg, you're up for asking our big question today.
Am I?
I thought we were doing the interview thing.
No.
Or are we doing?
They were doing conspiracy theories.
Oh, nice. Okay. Oh, okay. So this week on the podcast, we are talking about two articles that have just.
What are we talking about, Scott? What are we talking about?
Now that I know what we're talking about, I am willing to lead us there.
Yes.
Tell me, where do the people want to go that I may lead them?
We will follow. We will follow.
So a couple of really interesting articles have come out in the last few days, and they are connected to the same theme. One is a Medium post by Kenneth Tanner, friend of the show. I don't know if he's ever listened to the show, but we're us on the show are big fans of him.
Yeah, he did a book. We did a book together called Disquiet Time years ago.
Ah, nice.
That's how we got connected. Nice. He's a good guy.
Nice. I assume I started following him as a result of your interactions with him. He responds to my Insta stories about food.
He definitely is, and he's very active on social media. Great.
So he wrote an article called "Love Rules the World, Not Conspiracy," and then Christianity Today also released an article.
Oh, I thought we were just playing hide and seek.
That's the book. Scott, you're it.
Christianity Today also had an article come out called "On Christians Spreading Corona Conspiracies. Gullibility is Not a Spiritual Gift." So this has been a theme I've been seeing come up a good bit on social media about how First of all, the data out there suggests that Christians are more likely to fall for conspiracy theories than other demographics, which is scary. Christians are oftentimes more likely to share fake or unverified news from unreliable sources. And what that means is it has a deep impact on our witness in the world. One of the things Ed Stetzer points out in this article is that people sharing on Facebook on Easter week, sharing unsubstantiated conspiracy theories and the evidence for the resurrection devalues the evidence for the resurrection, because people have just seen someone else share about how the coronavirus was made as a result of 5G masts going up around the place. So, Starger, do you want to add something there?
No, but yes. It's more that what you stated is the first two things you stated there. What were they again? That they are more. Say them again.
Christians are more likely to believe conspiracy theories.
Yep, and two.
And more likely to share fake or unverified news.
So basically, they're Christians. They come by it honestly. What we believe is faith based and very difficult to verify on multiple levels. So I can kind of, in a way, I'm not justifying. Believe me, I'm not justifying ignorance by not seeking knowledge, nor am I justifying any sort of level of being a proponent of conspiracy theories or any of that. But I can understand why they're more susceptible, why people of faith are more susceptible to these things, because they are consistently raised in a culture and are consistently encouraged to believe things that actually are, for the most part, in a lot of ways, unverifiable, non-scientifically proven. That's what faith is. It's not.
Yeah.
I mean, these things are in concert. I believe faith and science are in concert when they're done correctly. But you can understand how people are a bit more susceptible to it.
Well, so why do you think that is then?
What do you mean?
So why do you think? So, for example, yes, like our faith, when we, as people who are part of people of faith in the Christian tradition, who believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus, despite historical claims to the contrary or scientific claims to the contrary, because resurrection is not a documented historical fact, and because historically, historians, there are some historians who question the validity of the accounts of Jesus, but very often on the basis that these accounts say that he did miracles, which is scientifically not possible and therefore is considered to be out of the realm of possibility. If people place faith in those things, we certainly place faith in those things. So why is it then that this has resulted in gullibility more than it has resulted in faithfulness? Do you know what I mean? Like, so when a conspiracy theory comes up about Hillary Clinton or 5G masts, or the coronavirus being created as a biochemical weapon, why does that appeal to people? Is it just because we have been trained to believe things without seeing the documentation? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I guess it is. It is what I'm saying. We're trained not to follow the footnotes. We're trained to just take the pastors or the priests or the historical books word for it, instead of actually tell me more. I want to dig into this. I want to learn this. I want to figure out what are you talking about? How is that possible? And I think that a lot of it, it's for me, sorry, Al, it's just that, like, we grow up, it's the old adage that we grow up telling our kids about, and this spoiler alert, but Easter Bunny, Santa Claus. And then at some age we tell them those things are not true, but Jesus still is. Although in their mind at that age, Al, he's giving me the big googly eyes, but at that age, it's all lumped into the same thing. It's a mythical, unproven, unseen story that we've been told our whole lives. So you're telling me now that Santa and the Easter Bunny aren't true, but Jesus is. So what? How do I reconcile these two things? So you grow up in a culture that begins there, and then graduates to where we're at. And part of me kind of wonders, what's the difference between gullibility and faith?
Well, I mean, I guess
that's a question.
that that depends on the way in which you hold your faith, I think. So there are Christian traditions, I think, that have a real strength in teaching in where critical thinking is part of discipleship.
Yeah.
And there are other streams within faith where it is not encouraged to question, it is not encouraged to doubt. Asking too many questions or being too inquisitive are considered character flaws rather than virtues, and that does result in a certain type of culture. And when those are the things, when we incentivize taking people, taking something on as soon as we hear it as if it is the gospel truth, then what ends up happening is people don't have the spiritual gift of discernment then as a result. And so people start from a point of, I want to believe the sensational thing that I read, particularly if it casts me in a certain light. Are there any other influences that go with that as well?
Well, if I can read out the definition of gullibility, which is a failure of social intelligence in which a person is easily tricked or manipulated into an ill-advised course of action. And I think,
do I need to repeat do I need to repeat the question?
Yeah, no, and I think, I think that's part of the problem within churches. People will just go along with actually deepening their faith. I mean, like we read, go through scripture, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Like, I mean, this whole idea of you need to work out why you believe, what you believe. Don't just take this for, it says so in the Bible, so it must be true. And actually really to unpack, why do I believe these certain things? Why do I hold on to this? And it's that merging, because one of the things I really enjoyed about Tanner's article that he wrote about this was, he was saying, look, I'm not saying conspiracy theories don't exist. They obviously exist, and some of them have credibility. And he gave the Lincoln as an example, in relation to
the assassination
of Abraham Lincoln. And I think, I mean, Trump did not come up with fake news, but it's been around for so long. But we're seeing it with him more and more. And a couple of weeks ago, by the time this comes out, everyone is going to remember this whole thing of him. Well, couldn't we inject, just such an idiot to come out with that. And even after trying to rewrite his own history as to, you need to understand sarcasm. And when you listen back, there's no sarcasm in what he's saying. He's literally saying, now he does say, is this something we can look into? I mean, and he's putting these as questions to a doctor. But there are people who put Trump on such a pedestal going, that's a great idea. I never thought of that.
Well, in different states, like, not to go too far down this rabbit hole, because we'll be here forever, because I think the guy's he's dangerous. And horrible, but Illinois and Maryland, different states, saw a massive spike in people calling in saying, okay, how do we go about doing this? How do we actually do what the president said? And they had to refute. I mean, when you have corporations having to come out and say, don't do what the president says. Oh my gosh. Anyhow, but you're right.
But I think it's when you have in church, like when we first got into this pandemic, there was someone to contact. We were having a vestry meeting the first Sunday where all churches had to kind of close down, and saying no one over or up to 100 couldn't meet and stuff. And so we had a vestry meeting that morning. There's about 20 of us got together, all social distance and all that sort of stuff. And someone to got in contact would be the night before saying, listen, it's not public yet, but the guards are going to have a complete lockdown on Monday. And I'm like, really? And they go, oh, well, I don't want to say, but my wife there's a guard connection and all this sort of stuff. I'm like, oh, please. Now, one of my best mates, Al, who is a guard, I contact him saying, dude, he goes, let me send you on a text. And he sent on this text, and it is hilarious in relation to, my friend who looks after the fish of Leo Varadkar's son, who blah, and just goes into this complete farcical story. And of course it didn't happen. But it's because someone spreads a rumor, and we had it in our own news saying, listen, don't be spreading false things over, WhatsApp or whatnot, because people were coming under fire of what is true, what is not true. And I think it's a case of, I don't think we should trust the government blindly. Equally, I do not think we should trust church leaders blindly.
No.
I think, Jesus gives us absolute credibility you need to check things. You need to work things out. You need to figure this stuff out. Is this too hard for you to believe? Go figure out why it's so hard for you to believe. You know.
Yeah, but you could have been one of the people walking away from the tomb on the third day saying the exact same thing. I mean, because that was just a rumor to most people.
Oh yeah, but the evidence was there was no body.
Yeah, but could they have taken it away before anyone else had got there? There's plenty of time between.
Maybe they could have.
I mean, but that's what I mean, though. This is how it builds.
Yes.
And then whole theologies are based upon it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, well, I think the danger of rumor for me is that I generally think that, like, I think where conspiracy theories are most dangerous, and this is why I think a lot of people latch onto them, is because it validates a position that they already held. Mm-hmm. I knew it. I knew those guys were after me. I knew the government was after me. I knew that that moon landing was faked, or I knew that whatever it is. But it kind of validates their position that, and like, there's a lot of people in the States who want Trump to be right so they can be right. Yeah. And so they're just constantly looking to validate their own position. And I think it's kind of a weird cyclical loop that is dangerous.
I sent out a tweet there on Saturday after all this stuff with the disinfectant broke. But the thing I wrote was, the more I read the views of Trump supporters, the more it seems that this is a doctrine of American presidential infallibility. It is not about whether or not Trump says true things. By their reasoning, what Trump says is true by virtue of the fact that it is he saying them.
Yeah.
And I think this actually often happens with church leaders as well. That the act of somebody you trust, somebody to whom you have given away the power of discernment and the responsibility for critical thinking. Mm-hmm. You have given that away to another person. Mm-hmm. You've delegated it to them. And then whatever they say is true by virtue of the fact that they said it, them saying it makes it true, because they can only say true things. The reason they can only say true things is because I have to be on the right side. Mm-hmm. And so it starts with that idea of, like, I need to be on the right. And so therefore, whoever it is who represents me must be infallible. Therefore, I don't have to question things. Now, I don't think anyone does this consciously, but I think this is at its root, it is a lack of character formation for people, because then people don't realize that they're being led up the garden path. This is how people get brought into cults. This is how people get stuck in toxic church environments, where when somebody brings an accusation against a church leader, they are not listened to because it is considered impossible that the leader would lead them astray. But also, and Tanner points this out in his article, it's also sorry, excuse me. It's also like a kind of Gnosticism that early in the church in the early centuries had to deal with this struggle against a group of people who appealed to the secret knowledge. They believed that they were the holders of the secret knowledge. And if you wanted to be in, you basically had to earn your way up to the ranks to know what they know. And it's a way of exerting power over people by making them feel an absence of knowledge within themselves and promising belonging if they can commit to the point of being admitted to the inner circle. It's almost like a multi-level marketing scheme, but with spiritual knowledge.
But same time we do, we also have a deep desire to lean on other people's expertise. When I go to a doctor and they tell me, Greg, you have this or that, I want to believe their years of experience, their belief in the Hippocratic Oath. I want to take all these things into account and say, I now need to go do something about this broken arm, or I need them to do something about this broken arm, instead of me going, that's interesting. That's a conspiracy theory that this is actually truly broken. I've seen the x-rays. I've heard the diagnosis, but I don't know. And the weird thing is, to me, is that we want to believe in the experts. So where do we get to a point where we can't trust? I mean, we are there obviously with Trump from day one, from Inauguration Day. But when it comes to, I'm talking about real experts in their areas, or theologians or pastors or whatever, because I know we're leaning towards this area in particular. When do we choose that we can trust and believe them what they're saying and take their word for it? And when do we just become skeptics forever, going, well, I need to test every single thing? Because that's also exhausting and probably not even sustainable.
I think there has to be a look back at the character of the person when they come and they say different things. And I mean, I know, like, we've seen it, unfortunately, within Christianity, where there are people who are great godly women and men, and they screw up, and then all of a sudden they're trying to redeem themselves or cover up whatever's been going on. But I often, like, when I was reading through your man Ed Stetzer, his article, what I was thinking of the movie Saving Private Ryan, where, you know, remember when they were all talking about what they thought Tom Hanks's character was, you know,
What his occupation was
what
before
his
the war.
occupation was, yeah. And he was asking, what's the money up to now? And eventually he tells them all, I was a teacher. And they're all like, what? You know, and this whole like shock, but he gets their attention by, he gives them this bit of truth. And then they say, what do you think about this mission? Do you think this is a great mission? He goes, yes, it's an honor and a privilege to do this. And I'm not going to complain to you because you are following my orders. I have someone that I will complain to and I will ask questions of. And I think that's the question. Like with conspiracy theorists, I mean, years gone by, there's the picture of people, you know, in a darkened room on their computer trying to find out or write things that actually, oh, this isn't true, I'll pass this out. But now, because of how sophisticated Twitter or Facebook is in relation, you pat something on, and if it spreads like wildfire, oh boy, this guy knows something, this woman, oh, they're onto something here, and I'll listen to that because that affirms to me what I want to be true. And so I know we had said this before in relation to, well, this is my truth. And you're going, just because it's your truth does not mean it's actually true. And that's the difficulty that we have, where all of a sudden we're living in a world where, well, everything is up for grabs. Everything is okay. All these and now, when actually it's really important to know what is fact and what is important. And, you know, like I was watching some of the reports on Sunday on Sky News, where the health officer from in England was being questioned by one of the journalists, and some of their questions were just like, I understand why you're asking them. Like they were saying, why can't you give us the name of the scientists that are giving you all this proof and all this facts? And there's just this relentless, how do we know you're telling us the truth? How do we know that we should all still be self-isolated? How do we know that this isn't working out well for some other government reason to get more power to say where people can control where they're going and all the rest? And I think on one level, there's some questions there that could be interesting. But there also is, we are living in a time now where actually truth, people are really searching and seeking out what is true, because there's a fear. And when people are searching for this truth out of fear, I think there's so much more at stake, because then people will be willing to do almost even more foolish things because they think, well, this will help, this will be good, and it'll bring a safety.
One of the things I found with in having conversations with people about what is true and what's not, because obviously we have to exercise this discernment for ourselves. I think this is a question for all of us in terms of what it means for us to talk about what is true in conversation with others, and what it means for us to discern what is true as a result of the evidence that we see in front of us. So one of the things that I find very helpful, I actually learned a lot about this on the show that the liturgists did on fake news, and they did some really, really good primers on how you discern legitimate news from fake news. So whenever somebody says studies say, so what studies? You know, like that's one of the big points of like, okay, I'm just going to make you pause right there. First of all, studies say multiple things, because studies are oftentimes either focused on really specific things in really specific conditions. And I don't know if I necessarily trust you as an interpreter of that data. No offense, but you're not a scientist in the area. You're not the one who did the study. So whenever anyone says studies say, that always kind of, you know, raises alarm bells for me. The other thing, if you say, where did you read that? And someone says on the internet, that's a dangerous thing. It's the equivalent of somebody in the 16th century saying, where did you read that? Oh, in a scroll. Yeah, but who wrote this? Like, where did, the fact that something is written down doesn't make it true. As anyone who's read my books can attest to.
Or the Bible.
And
here's my point, though, Scott. I know I'm coming across you. Is that everything we're talking about is also attributable to that which we believe.
Right. So there is that actually that actually does raise a really interesting point about, so how do we treat scripture as a book? If you grow up being taught from a fundamentalist inerrancy perspective that every single word in the Bible thank you, Al.
Alan lifted up a book that's from Richard Rohr, said, "What do we do with the Bible?"
Oh yes, yeah, it's good for the
Oh,
audio
sorry.
listeners.
Okay, yeah, for those listening in,
since 90% of this podcast, 90% of our listeners listen on podcast, not watch it on YouTube.
Why do we bother?
Because we still have to see each other. We're still in isolation, Greg.
Why do we? Even in self-isolation, this is too much. Yeah.
So let's say let's say you grow up within a tradition that values a view of inerrancy in scripture, which I that's not the theological standpoint that I take, but I think there are, I don't think that every viewpoint or perspective on that is necessarily wrong. But what is really dangerous is if you grow up without critical thinking in a space that says every word in the Bible is true, it means you can open up the Bible to any page that you want, take one verse and apply it to, because it's a book of facts, disconnected facts that say, well, the Bible says. Well, the Bible says a lot of things. The word literally means library. So, every library said it's about how you hold those things in tension. It's about how you understand them in their context, and the ability to be able to discern between what it says in one place and what it says in another brings you into an area of nuance, humility, and a sense of the contextual and historical differences that means that not everything can be directly applied across cultures. When that is done well in forming believers, one of the things that we see is, well, it is people saying things like, well, let me tell you what I think that I know about this. Or I can see two arguments within scripture for and against this. Yeah. Let's hold those two things in tension. Yeah. Just as in the same way, when you hear a scientist talk on TV, they don't speak categorically, not if they're well qualified. They say the information that we have so far leads us to believe. Yeah. Yeah. Because that's the scientific approach. Whenever I see anyone making categorical statements, particularly if they're based on prejudice. So, for example, in the anti-vaxxer movement, one of the things that we find is people arguing that vaccines cause autism, which, as a result of people being willing to endanger the lives of their own children and the children of others in order to prevent autism, is based on a phobia of people with disabilities. It's prejudicial. I would rather endanger my children and the other children than my child have autism, because that's the way in which they see autism, as being like a disease or something that makes somebody less or subhuman. And so, like, so often as well, we see in conspiracy theories that this is actually wound up in prejudice and the idea of somebody else being other, separate, or wrong by their nature. And that's why, the media are keeping it down, but I have the secret truth that confirms my suspicions about the world, that this is a story about me, that they are my enemy, that I am in danger. I couldn't possibly be a person of privilege exercising that privilege in a way that hurts other people. I am the victim here, and I have the secret knowledge, and I know who to trust. Those are all very comforting narratives. The problem is they lead to toxic individual and community lives.
They absolutely do. I mean, we all saw the picture. I might have even spoke about it before, where Jesus is my vaccine. I mean, it's laughable to me, but I actually would like to sit down with the person who's driving that truck and say, tell me about this. How did you come to this conclusion that Jesus, who you believe is the Son of God, is your actual vaccine? Do you, when you get the flu or when you get chickenpox or anything that I'm sure you and your families have all had numerous times, or a headache, what do you do in this situation? There's John Wimber who said that when he had a headache, they asked him, what do you do when you have a headache? Do you pray for healing? He said, well, I asked my wife for an aspirin, and then yes, I pray for healing. But it's a both and. And so I would personally want to unpack with them, how did you get to this position? But usually what happens, and I have had these conversations with actual family members of mine, not on this specific area, but in areas like this, like WMDs, for example, or the reason why Saddam Hussein orchestrated the Twin Towers falling, which obviously is just not true at all, but they were a whole massive amount of people were led to believe in order to perpetuate a horrendous and wrong and unjust war in Iraq. And so we have a history of people being convinced of things that aren't true and putting everything into it. I mean, think about the amount of people who sent their kids who then died in Iraq, based upon a lie. I mean, how much harder would it be for you to say that that's not true if it meant that you had seen your son or daughter die because of that untruth? So I can understand how the mind gets wrapped up in these stories, these false stories, and they don't want to let go of these false stories, because if I let go of these false stories, I let go a lot of who I am in my community and what I believe in, and then all of a sudden all starts to unravel. And to be honest with you, that takes a lot of work for someone to unravel that part of who they are.
Well, and particularly if, say, for example, in the story that you're telling, in the case of, say, somebody whose, child died in a war, if you then are confronted with information that says that war was based on false premises, you then have to come to terms with the fact that their blood was not shed by, it doesn't fit into the narrative of, it's their blood that buys our freedom. It's their blood was wasted. And I can see how that would be such an intellectual leap that completely changed my understanding of the story in which I live. I don't know if I would be able to come to terms with it.
No,
which is why it's so important before rather than after.
Yeah, and obviously where I always want to make sure that we mention that there are hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives who were lost during that time.
Absolutely.
Based on an unjust war as well. How do they generationally talk to their families about, well, we were invaded because a president had daddy issues. I thought it was because of the Twin Towers falling. No, that was Saudi Arabia mostly, actually. But we won't go there because that's to do with oil, blah, blah, blah. But it's more that I think that not blah, blah, blah is dismissive, but blah, blah, blah. Let's not go down that wormhole right now. But I think that it's weird because I find myself, even though I was frustrated to see that truck with Jesus, my vaccine, and frustrated to see the honking their horns and shouting at doctors. My mom works in the medical profession in Stanford, and I want to understand, how did you get to a place where this conspiracy theory has more weight than actual common sense or critical thinking or good footnoting? Why are you at this place? Are you just exhausted by life? Where you just don't want to think about it? Is it just too much to constantly? Is it easier just to go along with what everyone else is saying around you, so that and then if so, how do I then retrofit this back or into my own faith experience and asking the questions, how often have I expected people to blindly follow what I have to say without giving any critical thought or challenging my theological premises or whatever, because it's not particularly encouraged either. So how do we create a society or a community of people who could be critically thinking, yet still have faith? It's a tricky thing.
I think, one of the last movies I saw before lockdown was Dark Waters. It always goes there with Mark Ruffalo. Yeah, that was a great film. But I think what, like, Greg, one of the things you're talking about is the world, and the church is so full of it too. But the world, there's so much untruth. There's so many lies that are out there, and I think it's one of the reasons why, even when Jesus, like, and you're talking about all this, and I'm thinking about Jesus when he was put in, or when the woman who was caught in adultery is put in front of him. And they're bombarding him with questions, and they're saying, oh, well, what do you think we should do? Because scripture says this, what should we do? And he says nothing. And he draws in the sand. And there's a sense of bringing calm amidst the chaos of all the questions, all the bombardments, everything that's going on. And then Jesus just responds with a question. Well, whoever here hasn't sinned, throw that first stone. And I wonder what it would have been like if there would have been the 18-year-old going, oh, score, boom, because, and they throw in the stone. But as we read the story, as it goes from the eldest to the youngest, there's crap. Okay, come on, let's go. And it's confronting difficult situations with grace and with that open hand. I mean, as you're saying, Greg, like, there's some who'd want to have a protest with that guy to drag him out of the truck, to burn the truck. And so that taught him. And you're going, there's nothing good in that. There's absolutely, I mean, bringing violence or bringing antagonism into a scenario where, well, I want to try and figure out why you're thinking this. But I think the world, and unfortunately, the track record is there's so many influential liars that are out there in relation to how they try and get across a particular thing. And you're going, as Scott, you said earlier on, okay, what are these studies? What's the trend? Where's that coming from? Who's going to benefit from this particular path? And for us, you know, as a community of believers, it's a case of we got to hold that tension and be wise with how we speak. And you know, I think, I can't remember which one it says, but it talks about in Ephesians, let's be wise, let's not be foolish. Let's see, and we got to make sure before we start speaking out on different things. And Naomi asked me a question last week. You know, Dad, have you ever had to preach anything that you don't believe? And I thought, that's a great question. And I was able to say, no, I've never preached anything that I don't believe. But I can think of times where I've had to go back and say, I know I said this a number of years ago. I was wrong. That was not right. And I think there has to be, do you know what I mean? And I think
I've never preached anything I don't believe, but I preached a lot of things that I don't believe now.
Yes.
The tricky thing there though, guys, is that so you might have had 3 years, Alan or Scott, X amount of years, that have passed since those times. And maybe people with less discerning, or maybe people who don't take the time to reflect while Jesus spoke about throwing stones. You know, Jesus left space for reflection. But maybe people who don't have time or the desire to critically think, maybe they've been believing what you've said all along. And maybe they've not stopped believing. Maybe that's mushroomed into a massive belief. And so that's the tricky thing about it, is that, you know, there's a joke in my family that Dad always asks, once someone says a fact in the house, they always then follow it up with 2 or 3 sources, right? Because I'm like, guys,
excellent.
Because I'm like, where'd you get that from? They'll say the internet, Dad, but I've also, the Guardian also wrote it, the Times also wrote it, and they give me 2 or 3 like footnotes, because they know that I'm going to be like, yeah, but so what if they said that? So what if this YouTuber said it? Does it actually land anywhere? And I think my concern, sorry, Scott, I know you want to jump in, but
no, it's okay. Yeah.
Is that people grow up with a bias. Doesn't matter how it's formed. It could be cultural. Most likely it's cultural, you know, different type of cultures, faith culture, the neighborhood that they grew up in, whatever it is. We grow up with biases, and we end up listening to different things and different radio shows or podcasts or television shows that lean into our bias. And so if someone says, they quote Fox News, I roll my eyes, right? But I know people that when I say, well, I was watching on CNN, and they roll their eyes. And so now you're in like all of a sudden, I mean, so I can understand why people get frustrated with this conversation, because they're like, Greg, just because you're a New York Times reading CNN, whatever type person, doesn't mean that you're right. And I'm like, okay, that's fair enough. I understand where you're coming from. But I've also followed this up with, you know, realizing that the president that you espouse as being honorable and Christian also told over 15 to 20,000 lies. When I said that to my family members, they're shocked by that. That's not true at all. I'm like, but it's verifiably true through multiple sources, scientific sources, you know, global sources, various people smarter than me. And they're like, yeah, but it's not true. That's just what you believe. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So now you're in a situation where you're trying to show people that their bias, though it influences them, can't lead them. And it's a tricky thing.
Well, I do find that in conversations with people where I'll say, well, you know, I mean, I was reading this the other day about this scientist, and I've read it, you know, and I read it either, you know, through a reputable news site, you know, name whichever one you consider to be reputable. Yeah. And someone goes, yeah, well, that's not what, like, I mean, I read this article on this other website, and it's like exposethetruth19.info. And I'm like, okay, so we need to have a sliding scale of what we consider to be authoritative sources. Like, what do we consider to be reliable things to actually to actually lean on? It reminds me of in Acts, when Paul goes to Thessalonica and he preaches the gospel to a group of first century Jews, and he preaches to them that Jesus is the Messiah who has come, lived, died, was raised from the dead, and we now enter into the age of the kingdom of God that's breaking into the world. And they go, great, cool. And he's like, whoa, like, are you not even gonna ask me any like follow-up questions? And then in the next chapter he goes to Berea, and in Berea they immediately go okay, and they go back to the Torah and they look at the case that he's making and how it's traced through the Torah as a fulfillment of the promise. And then they come back and they say, okay, no, actually we see where you're coming from here. Paul treats the Bereans as being wise, and the Thessalonians as being foolish. But the challenge is that is no longer the case today. Very often today, if somebody makes a case like that and you go and you question them, they say, oh, you have little faith, as if rather than actually saying no. Scripture has a really, really good basis on the importance of discernment as it being a fruit of, as it being a gift of the Spirit. The intellectual integrity is not a flaw in Christianity. No. And I was really struck by this, because sometimes you don't even get to this conversation because the damage has already been done. Has anyone watched The Loudest Voice?
Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. So
it's incredible.
It's a TV show based on the life of Roger Ailes, the guy who started Fox News, and he's played by Russell Crowe. And
I've heard of it.
Oh, it's phenomenal. Like, I thought it was amazing. Now, I have to say, the source material for it is from a bunch of exposés about Roger Ailes, and I'm assuming. I think the whole story as a whole is probably quite reliable. I'm sure the individual conversations are probably more up to debate and question. But one of the things that he says to an up-and-coming journalist who's been manipulating throughout the film, throughout the show, he says, everybody's out here trying to tell people what to think. But if you want to own people forever, tell them how to feel. And one of the biggest problems that we have with a lot of this information that isn't verifiable, that can't be trusted, is it makes people feel a certain way, and that feeling is addictive, and people find it very hard to shake that, because then to embrace a different kind of truth is to let go of that feeling of being in the right, that feeling of being the favorite, that feeling of being blessed, that feeling of being a victim. All of those things that we want to believe about ourselves because they increase our importance and they decrease our responsibility. All of those things are they're like a drug, and they're a hell of a drug. And it's very, very difficult to wean yourself off it.
And I think as well, one of the things I'm trying to do as best as possible is practice compassion in those situations. So I know this, obviously you guys know me well, I'm wrong all the time. And so I love when I love when I'm sitting with people who have life experience or greater knowledge than I do. And nice clapping sign there, little emoji. Is that where I learn most is when those people go, that's really interesting, Greg. Tell me more about that. How did you come to that conclusion? And then their response is, well, my understanding is this, Greg. And it'd be interesting if you consider maybe exploring this way of thinking or this critical way of going about. Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Now I can. Yeah, you broke up there. Critical thinking.
All right. You were laughing, Al, at some point.
Because you sounded like R2-D2 again. Okay. Sorry.
Yes.
It's literally all it takes. Yeah.
I love R2-D2. But it's more my point that is that I love being with people, and I try to be this with others as well, where when you see that there's a conspiracy theory, for example, or something thrown out that kind of doesn't register as maybe legit, instead of going, you're an idiot, you go, oh, that's okay. Well, tell me a bit more about that. Why do you feel like that? And, a lot of times there's legitimate reasons why they come to that conclusion that, things they've read, family members have said, people they've trusted. It doesn't matter, church leaders, whatever it is, have told them something that, and you have to help them deconstruct and pull that apart slowly and gently, because you don't want to destroy their, you don't want to kind of just take apart their identity. Identity is the wrong word. You don't
their
want
foundation for what they believe. I mean,
I don't want to leave someone. I don't want to get into a conversation with someone and them to feel bloodied and left on the floor, lifeless. I want to get into conversation with people, and I hope people get in conversations with me as well, where I feel like after conversation, wow, I never thought of it that way before. I think I could be wrong. I need to look into this. And then I grow, and then I grow from that, instead of the other way around, which is you're wrong, you're an idiot. And then you're like, the first thing when someone says that to you, you get defensive because, hold on a second, you can't talk to me like that. And neither do I want to hear it either. So it's like, I'm trying to, as I get older, be a lot more compassionate in the way that I approach these conversations, because I don't think people are led to these places just usually blindly. You know, there's a process of getting there.
And I think as well, like for like even the title of the article, you know, gullibility is not a spiritual gift. Discernment is. And I think that that's where, like, I mean, wisdom and figuring things out and actually journeying with people. I mean, like, we are not, you know, if anything, even in this, you know, this time that we're going through, like, you know, we're not created to be isolated and alone and away from others. And it is, how do we sharpen one another? In the challenge that goes on there, and the vulnerability, but also for those who do know better, like who actually know they have a platform of where people listen, or for those of the influence, for those where there is that relationship. And we see this even within your own families, you know, of where we've listened to parents because they have tried their best to pass on information or knowledge. Well, it was good enough for my parents, so I'll do the same thing. And we pick up habits, we pick up different things. But as we get older, we might realize some of this stuff is great. Some of this other stuff is probably not so great. That needs to change, because that was wrong. And I think there's taking on that discernment of having the social awareness and the emotional intelligence of going, I need to flip this, you know, so how do I change this? So actually that's no longer my narrative. You know, and the importance and the influence of not just the feeling from the story, but also what we're doing in either enhancing or shutting down that story, saying, no, that does not have a place here. And here's why. And I think that they're the moments where the discernment, and Greg, always with discernment, there has to be that compassion, you know, or that grace, you know, and it's no excuse, I think, because, oh, well, I read it here, that's it, case closed, I believe. I think there has to be a bit further digging in that. You know, and you going back to the story of the tomb, of when people there was without a doubt Jesus coming back and spending time with people, like the road to Emmaus that we just looked at on Sunday the idea of Jesus walking with the disciples as they walked away from Jerusalem, and he's like sharing and talking, and they're like, wow, yeah, that's wow. And then it's the revelation of, oh, flip me, it's Jesus. And it's a case of they get back and there's a sharing of the story, and those stories dovetailing so well together, saying this is true because of our experience, but also of what the facts are, you know, in relation to where we are and where we see this. And it's not just for us, but it is for others.
Yeah, I think that, go ahead.
I was just going to say that in a lot of these conversations where somebody is trying to convince somebody else of something, whether it's people trying to share their faith with someone and argue for like the evidence of the resurrection, or somebody trying to convince somebody about whether you're right and trying to convince somebody else that they're wrong, or you're wrong and you're trying to convince someone else that you're right. The way in which we do that, and the tone with which we do that, the attitude with which we do that, is crucial. Because as you're pointing out there, Greg, like shame has no power of liberation. So making somebody feel like an idiot, making somebody feel disempowered, like making somebody feel like, you know, there's a reason that wake up sheeple doesn't work as a thing to say to people, because nobody wants to admit that they're a sheep, even if they are one. So it has no power to liberate. But also it also creates massive divides in society that have had a huge impact on our cultural narrative, between whenever anybody turns around and says, oh, well, that's what the elites want you to think.
Yeah.
And the reason that some people categorize other people as believing, it's not because the person who feels shamed by them feels that person is elite. It's because that person has arrogantly treated that person negatively by being elitist. And so there is a divide happening in society then between between different perspectives and viewpoints, because shame is a weapon that is being used in all these conversations, and it's only accentuating the divide between us. That's going back to the story that Alan was talking about the woman caught in adultery. Basically, the religious leaders throw her down in front of him and say, is Rome right or are we right? Are you in or out? And there's somebody's life is at stake in the middle of this. And and Jesus responds by refusing to take sides and seeking to bring truth to a situation that has been manipulated, and to liberate the woman from a law that would destroy her, and the religious leaders from a law that makes them destroyers of others, because neither of them realize the goodness of the heart of God that seeks the redemption and the restoration of both. And I think if we're going to be people of transformative nuance, we need to be less, we need to stay away from shame. We need to stay away from arrogance. We need to have the humility to be able to listen. We need to have hearts of compassion that enter into conversation deeply and that hold things in tension and always point to a greater truth than the simple premises that are being given to people of, are you in or are you out? We don't want to play in or out games anymore.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that's fascinating. Although I think that Jesus right now, I can't speak for Jesus. No, nor will I ever. He might be standing at those in the White House correspondence room and saying, "Don't believe this idiot. Talk to your doctor. Listen to the scientists. Use your incredible lump of meat that I placed on your." But I think that one of the things that I'm aware of is also in the Bible, it says, "Don't call yourself a teacher; you'll be judged more severely." And I think that we as people who are leaders in different areas of our lives, it just reminds me consistently. And actually, it's funny because people have asked me often, what have you learned from academia? And a lot of people think that's a joke, whatever. But what I have learned a lot from it is just to be consistently, healthily critical of everything I say and write and do. And making sure that I'm not just saying it because it sounds clever, but actually because there's weight, historical, factual weight behind it. There's centuries of people leaning into this way of thinking. And so, I think it just reminds me of our responsibility, whether it's having a Zoom call with a friend or a young adult or another leader or whatever that means, or whether it's writing a talk or writing an essay or whatever we're doing, talking to our family, that we need to be constantly aware of what we're saying, why we're saying it, how we're saying it, and what that's inviting to the conversation. Is it inviting an open conversation, or is it closing down a conversation? I'm always interested when conversations are had and someone says something that closes it down. You go, I wonder why they closed that conversation down. I think something in the middle of it. So I think it reminds me of my responsibility. This conversation does going, in every conversation I have, to just be not just compassionate, but also someone who desires good, solid, critical thinking and desires to find truth that actually has weight to it, not just my voice. It's just because I say it doesn't mean it's true. And check it, and enjoy that process. Don't get overwhelmed by it. Invite conversation into that process. Because I can understand how this whole conversation could be very overwhelming for people as well. So everything I hear, I need to fact check. But
and as overwhelming as that is, the pursuit of truth requires that kind of responsibility, because truth actually isn't easily come by. We tend not to stumble over it in blog format on a GeoCities website. And so these things require discernment.
Yeah, cool. Awesome.
Good times.
Good times.
All right, nerds. We'll
see
you soon.
See you guys.
Be good. Take care.
Bye.
And part of me kind of wonders what's the difference between gullibility and faith.
Well, I mean, I guess
that's a question.